Hey Book Dragons, welcome back to my channel. Today I am reviewing The Sandman Season 1. Let's go! Thank you to my patrons. I really appreciate all you do to support the channel. So if you've been following my channel for any length of time, you know that I am a huge fan of Neil Gaiman and a huge fan of The Sandman, which is the comic book series that put Neil Gaiman on the map. It's what really made him famous. And recently I watched the Netflix adaptation of The Sandman, and that is what we're talking about today. Before we get into it, make sure you like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. If you enjoy my content, don't miss out on my future videos, okay? Let's get into the review. So if you are not familiar with Sandman, it follows Dream. He is one of 7 beings known as the Endless. They personify different experiences of human existence. Dreams, despair, desire, death, etc. This series focuses on Dream, the main character of the story, as he interacts with different people in the human world and as he interacts with his siblings as well as they interact with the human world in their own respects. I recommend you check out my video right here about the Sandman graphic novels themselves and why you should read it, because I do go more into depth there. But this video is specifically going to be reviewing the miniseries on Netflix and how I think they did with adapting it. So Season 1 adapts the first 2 volumes of the graphic novel series. Volume 1 is Preludes and Nocturnes, and Volume 2 is The Doll's House. And I believe the goal is to eventually adapt the entire series if they get renewed for that many seasons, which, based on Season 1 so far, I am very hopeful that it will get renewed for at least a season or 2 more, and hopefully enough to do the entire story justice. So for at least the first half of Season 1, we are following Dream as he goes about to collect the artifacts that were stolen from him. And they were stolen from him because he was imprisoned for the last 100 years by a human sorcerer named Roderick Burgess. Roderick Burgess had initially intended to imprison Death so that he could have eternal life and get his son back from the dead. Instead, he ended up capturing Dream. Who knows if the incantation went wrong or what happened, but he captured Dream instead. So Dream has been imprisoned, and after he gets out of imprisonment, he has to go and collect his artifacts of power. His bag of sand, his ruby medallion, and his helmet of power. And so for a good chunk of the first half of the season, we are following Dream as he goes and finds these artifacts. It takes him to hell, it takes him to various points in the human world, and it's just really, really wonderfully done. They stayed very true to the source material. I thought it was handled wonderfully. When he visits hell, he does encounter an African woman who he had wanted to be his queen, and things happened, and he ended up imprisoning her in hell for disobedience. So we do get to see an African version of Dream as well, because Dream, just like the rest of the Endless, they take on different forms depending on the needs of the culture that they are overseeing. So in this case, Dream was an African male, and the woman that he wanted to be his queen did not end up wanting to be his queen, and so he encounters her in hell when he goes to retrieve one of his artifacts. and he meets up with Lucifer and the demon hordes of hell. He also encounters humans in their world as he goes about to recover his bag of sand and his ruby of power. And then the latter half of the series mainly focuses on two major storylines. One follows the story of Rose Walker, who is trying to track down her brother Jed. They were separated as a result of divorce, and she's been looking for him for a few years now. And alongside this storyline, we follow the Corinthian, who is a dream gone rogue and is one of the most revered serial killers of his day. And he gets invited to the Cereal Convention, which is a play on words. It's spelled cereal like the food, but it actually refers to serial killers, and it's quite the entertaining spectacle. There are other storylines in this as well. One of my favorites is the story of Hob Gadling. He is a human who Dream happened to overhear boasting about how he was going to cheat death, and Dream made a bargain with him so that he would not die, and in exchange he would meet with Dream every 100 years to tell what he had learned about living forever and what it was like. And so it's episode 6 in this series, and it's one of my favorite episodes, and it is one of my favorite storylines in the graphic novels, and they adapted it so well. I was so very impressed with the adaptation that they did for it. And I do have some favorite scenes in the series as well. Specifically, toward the end of Rose Walker's tale, we also encounter a character named Gilbert, also known as Fiddler's Green, and he is a being, actually a place from the Dreaming, who decided he wanted to experience life as a human. And just the very end of Rose Walker's story, where Fiddler's Green goes home, was just marvelously done. Absolutely loved the way they adapted it, and it was so close to the original. I was just extremely happy with it. I also really enjoyed the different interludes where Dream meets with the Fates and where Rose Walker also encounters the Fates, and that was also very well adapted from the graphic novel series. And one thing that made this adaptation so good was the fact that Neil Gaiman was intimately involved with it. It's his baby. He wanted to be involved. He was involved, and as a result, we have probably the best adaptation that we would ever get for Sandman, and one of the best adaptations I have ever seen. Let's move on from the story adaptation to talk about the characters. So first and foremost, I want to talk about Dream. Tom Sturridge was cast in the role of Dream, and he is magnificent. He sounds the part. He looks the part. He acts the part. I can't think of a better person that they could have cast in this role, and I'm so happy he got the role. Kirby Howell-Baptiste is cast in the role of Death, and she is absolutely magnificent. I absolutely loved her portrayal of Death. There's really only one episode in particular where we see Death in this first season, and she brought such a depth of emotion and believability to the role, and I was crying during several parts of that episode because of just how well she portrayed Death. So much of the dialogue directly from the graphic novels was implemented in the episode, and it was great. It was fantastic, and you could tell that she was bringing a lot of her own personal compassion into her performance as Death. Mason Alexander Park was cast in the role of Desire. Desire is the twin sibling to Despair and one of Dream's siblings as well. Desire is always trying to manipulate Dream, and Mason was just absolutely perfectly cast. The mischievous nature of Desire was so clearly portrayed, and I really enjoyed how they portrayed the Tower of Desire. The tower that they live in is a ginormous statue, more or less, of Desire, and they live inside the statue, and it's just magnificent. And the way I was wondering if they were going to pull it off in the show, and they did. They pulled it off with a few minor changes, but they pulled it directly from the comic books. It was magnificently done. David Thewlis played John Dee. And if you're not familiar with David Thewlis, he played Professor Lupin in the Harry Potter series. He was fantastically cast for the role. John Dee is a major character in the graphic novel series. David Thewlis just did a magnificent job portraying this character, and it was so believable and so menacing. Like, John Dee is literally extremely menacing, and David Thewlis pulled it off smashingly. Charles Dance made a brief appearance as Roderick Burgess, the sorcerer that imprisons Dream. And if you're not familiar with Charles Dance, I'm not sure where you've been, but he did play Tywin Lannister in Game of Thrones. He is a magnificent actor, perfectly cast in the role of Roderick Burgess. I just thought it was excellently done. Jenna Coleman portrays Joanna Constantine in the Sandman TV series. In the graphic novel series, Joanna Constantine pops up in the 1800s as an ancestor of John Constantine. In any case, Jenna Coleman was brilliantly cast. Patton Oswalt does the voice for Matthew the Raven, and Matthew the Raven is one of my favorite characters from the graphic novel series and also from the show. He was magnificent. I think that Patton Oswalt was perfectly cast. He's a fan of the graphic novels as well. When you go into it with that much heart and soul because you love this series so much, it makes all the difference. In the graphic novel series, Matthew actually talks, and they didn't try to do any kind of like you hear him talking but his mouth doesn't move. No, the beak actually moves when he talks, and it was fantastic. Now, there's a library in the Dreaming. It's a massive library. It just goes on, and it includes works from all throughout human history that have been written, and some that have not been written yet, and some that were never written. And Lucienne is the librarian of the Dreaming. She is portrayed by Vivienne Okonkwo, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. She gave a brilliant performance, a heartwarming performance. Her interactions with Dream throughout the series were so believable and real and heartbreaking at times, because there were times that they just didn't really see eye to eye, and you felt it. She was a perfect cast. Merv Pumpkinhead is one of the many magical creatures that Dream created for his kingdom. He is portrayed by Mark Hamill, or I should say he's voiced by Mark Hamill. He doesn't show up very much in this season, but Merv is fantastic, and so is Mark Hamill. You couldn't ask for better. Gwendolyn Christie from Game of Thrones fame plays Lucifer. She was an excellent choice for Lucifer. Boyd Holbrook was cast as the Corinthian, and watching his performance throughout the season, I cannot think of a better actor ever to portray the Corinthian. It was just magnificent. Vanessa Sumanyai was cast as Rose Walker in the series, and she was just brilliant. I absolutely loved her portrayal, and I could not go without mentioning Stephen Fry. He was cast as Gilbert, aka Fiddler's Green. Just a command performance from him. It was amazing. So, yeah, really an excellent cast overall, and I was thoroughly impressed with the creative talent that they got for this. So now let's talk about some of the changes that were made. And I will say, I think the changes that they made to the series were very reasonable. There were things that had to be changed, and there's a lot of purists out there that will shout it from the rooftops, oh, they ruined it, they've just completely destroyed the story. No, I am not one of those. I don't think that. I think there were changes that had to be made, and they did a good job. One of the changes was in the time period that the show was set in. In the original graphic novels, the story was set in the late 80s, early 90s, so Dream had been in prison for 70-some years. In this series, he has been in prison for 100 years before he gets out. And they did that mainly just to bring everything up to date with technology so that it would make sense. You know, people in the series have cell phones and things like that. I think that was a perfectly reasonable choice. Another one of the changes they made was adding a son for Roderick Burgess. So he has one son in the show who was in the graphic novels as well, Alexander Burgess. In the show, they added another son who had died untimely. His name was Randall. That was one of his additional motivations for trying to capture death at the very beginning, so that he could hopefully bring his son Randall back from the dead. In the graphic novel series, it wasn't that. It was just, he wanted to live forever. He was selfish. He didn't want to have to deal with death, so he was going to imprison death. There's also one story in the graphic novels where two creatures from the dreaming capture a boy and put him into this dream world to torture him and feed on his dreams. And that was changed a little bit as well. Instead of two creatures, there's one creature called Gaunt in the TV show. And of course, in the graphic novels, it was Rose Walker's brother, Jed. And they did that in the show as well, but that was changed a little bit as well. Another change that they made to the series that was kind of major was with Joanna Constantine. So in the graphic novel series, Joanna Constantine shows up in the 1800s, roughly, and she is an ancestor of John Constantine, who is a familiar hell hunter and demon hunter in the DC comic universe. So he does show up in the graphic novels, but in interviews Neil had said that they had a lot of issues getting some of the rights to the characters, with DC kind of being in upheaval right now with everything that's going on. So instead of John Constantine, Joanna Constantine filled the role that John Constantine did in the graphic novels. A major change for some people, but I think it works. I think Jenna Coleman's fantastic, so I wasn't bothered by it. But some people who are purists might feel like, oh no, we needed John Constantine. But when you've got rights issues going on, you really can't do that. There was also a rights issue with John Dee's character, because in DC Comics, John Dee is the character who becomes Dr. Destiny. And in the Sandman graphic novels, Dr. Destiny does make an appearance. I don't know if we will see him make an appearance in the show or not. But I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I think John Dee's story arc was perfect as it was. He was absolutely menacing. And also, due to DC Comics rights, while we're on that subject, we'll talk about the changes to the imprisonment of Jed by the creatures of the dreaming. So in the graphic novels, he was imprisoned in a dream state by these creatures, and he kept encountering two particular characters, Hippolyta Hall and Hector Hall, who are characters from DC Comics as well. And Hector Hall shows up in the graphic novel as a comic version, like a superhero version of the Sandman. And of course, in DC Comics, he ends up becoming Dr. Fate, but they couldn't really do that, and so in the show, Jed ended up role-playing as the superhero, the Sandman, as opposed to Hector Hall. Even though Hector Hall and Lyta are both in the TV series, their stories are tweaked slightly. And then there were also changes in terms of the race of certain characters in the story. So in the graphic novel series, Rose Walker is white, and in the show, she's African American, and I thought it was a perfect choice. I don't see anything wrong with it. Some people do, but I thought she was absolutely perfect for the role. Death got cast as a black woman as well, whereas in the graphic novel series she was white. It doesn't matter. She was fantastic. One of the other changes that I really liked in the story was the expanded role for the Corinthian. So he only first appears toward the latter half of these first two volumes. And in the show, he is like pretty much the primary antagonist. So I just thought he was an excellent character. I was blown away by his performance, and I'm really glad that they gave him an expanded role. But people will complain about changes, and we're going to get to some of those complaints right now as we talk about controversies. One of the biggest complaints that I heard was that Netflix ruined the Sandman story by promoting a woke agenda. And I loved the comment from Neil Gaiman, because he said, no, the Sandman has always been woke, if you want to use that terminology. But they did make changes that would appear woke to certain people. They cast a black woman as Death, whereas Death was white in the comics. But why does that matter? Tell me, why does that matter? The Endless are raceless. They take on different forms and appearances as they are dealing with different aspects of human culture and different races within human culture. But they are raceless, so why does it matter who was cast in the role of Death? Why does it matter the color of her skin? It shouldn't. That shouldn't matter anyway. So if that's woke, then yeah, okay, I'm woke. But it's, these controversies pop up. There was a huge controversy over the casting of Mason Alexander Park, who is a non-binary person, as Desire. And it blows my mind, because guess what? Desire is non-binary in the comics, always has been. So it was a perfect casting. I don't understand. Who better to portray a non-binary character than an actual non-binary person? It just added so much depth and believability to the role. It was just fantastic. And again, the Endless, not only are they raceless, they're sexless, they're genderless. They don't conform to human norms. They are supernatural, unending entities. They may happen to appear as male or female or non-binary or what have you, but ultimately they are wholly other. And there are other LGBTQ characters that were cast in the show, one of which is one of my favorites, the guy who plays Hal. Hal is a performer, and he cross-dresses for his performances, and it is absolutely brilliant and beautiful and just an awesome character. And I keep being amazed and pleased with the castings. So yeah, there was a lot of controversy, but hey, it's already in the graphic novels. Those of you who have taken issue with it just really didn't pay attention to the graphic novels, apparently. So I did not really find anything that I did not like about the Sandman adaptation on Netflix. And I'll tell you, I went into it with cautious optimism, because I know how important it is to Neil Gaiman. It's his baby. I know how involved he was with the production of it. And so I went in optimistic. I have to be honest, because I know that Neil Gaiman was there to make sure that they did right by him and were respectful of the fan base. I just am so amazed with how well it's done, because Netflix can be hit or miss, right? But ultimately, they just did a bang up job with the adaptation, and I'm so pleased with how it turned out. The series does such a good job of bringing out all the emotions, all these different things that humans are meant to experience reading something like this in the graphic novels, and the way it was translated to the TV series was really fantastic, and I couldn't be happier. I'm really hoping that it does get a second season. I think it will. It's doing very well on Netflix. From what I understand, it's doing very well on the ratings, and so I have high hopes that it will get a second season. You should watch it. If you haven't already, let me know in the comments below what you think, what your thoughts are. Have you watched it yet? Have you not watched it and now you're even more excited to watch it? I really hope you do. If for no other reason than to make fans happy by getting more seasons of it, because the more people that watch it and the more consistent the viewership is, the more likelihood we are to get more and more seasons of Sandman, and it is a story that deserves to be told. So watch it, enjoy it, and I can't wait to hear what you think. And if you've enjoyed this video and you enjoy the content I put out, like I said at the beginning, like and subscribe to my channel. And that's it, guys. Make sure you are reading more books. Read the graphic novel series. I'll talk to you soon.